today we are back and ready to bind the quilt that we made the other day, the Peanuts quilt. So we've taken some strips of the binding that we want, which is our backing, and we've cut them at 2.5 inches wide by the width of fabric. And we're going to sew them together and get started making this binding. To make this binding, we're going to take one strip and another strip, and we're going to put them together, right sides together, at an angle like this. And then we're going to sew from here to here across here. Once you've got your fabrics laid out like this at the angle and then right sides together, you'll take it to the sewing machine and you will stitch diagonally from here to here. Now that you've done that, you'll clip any of this excess beyond that seam line, about 1/4 inch away from it. Throw this away or use it for a crumb quilt. And then your binding is ready. We got to iron it like that, and then we're ready to put it on. We're going to put wrong sides together and iron it like this all the way down this piece, and then we are ready to attach the binding. To get started putting the binding on, you're going to put your quilt at your machine with the back side up. I attach when I'm doing it by machine, I attach my binding to the back so that if my stitches get off at all, it's going to show on the back than the front. But hopefully it doesn't at all, but this way it's just a precaution. So I'm going to start with laying my binding along my edge, and I'm going to want about this much to flip down. I'm not even going to start sewing that part. So I'm going to lay that down there, and I'm going to pin it at any point on any side, just not near an edge. So I've pinned the top part. Let me get you where you can see it. The top part of my binding is pinned right here. Now I'm going to go down, I don't know, about 8 inches or so, just guessing, not measuring. And I'm going to start sewing about here, because when I attach my binding at the end, I want this piece loose so that I can attach that binding. So I'm going to start a couple inches down, 8 or so. I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and I'm going to start sewing a 1/4 inch seam down this binding. I'm going to sew this until I get close to the edge, and then I'm going to show you what I do. Keep the edges together and straight. And when I get to the edge, I'll show you what I do. I'm going to sew almost to the edge, maybe 1/4 inch from the edge. Then I'm going to pull my quilt out, cut my threads. Now there's different rules of thought here. Some people don't cut the thread and they just turn it and keep going. I don't do that method, but there's nothing wrong with that method. I just don't do that method. So then I'm going to take, let me see if you can see it a little bit better down here. Then I'm going to take this edge that's still going, and I'm going to flip it to where it goes the direction of the next side. So I'm going to turn it at an angle like that. See what I'm talking about? Let me do it again. I've got my edge like this. I'm going to turn it to where this is even with this. I'm going to put my fingers right there. I'm going to take this side and I'm going to flip it over my fingers. Take my other hand and hold it right there so that now my fabric is going the direction I need it to go for this next row of binding, next side of binding. Then I'm going to take it back to the machine, and I'm going to put it under here at the very edge of it. I'm going to start sewing again at 1/4 inch all the way down this side until I get to almost the end at the other side, and I'm going to do the same thing. Stick with me, and when I get to the end, I'll show it to you again, and then we'll end up meeting the edges and finishing this back binding off. Okay, I'm at the other edge. I've sewed almost to the end. I'm pulling it out from under the needle again. Then I am taking it. It's going to lay straight like this down the side. Taking it up, and I'm making it even with this row that I'm wanting it to go towards. So I've got my angle here. Hold my fingers, flip it over, take my other hand, hold it down, and now it's going the direction I need it to go. So I'm going to take it back over here, and I'm going to sew it from the edge at 1/4 inch, and I'm going all the way down this side. I'm going to do the same thing when I get to the end of this row, and then we'll show you how to unite them, the two ends. I've gotten pretty close to where I started. Here's where the pin is, and here's where I'm at. So, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches away. I've stopped sewing. I'm pulling it out, cut my threads, and we're trying to unite these two pieces. Now, we know that this piece right here is 2.5 inches wide, and we're going to be sewing that diagonal seam to connect them. So we want a 2.5 inch overlay because of that seam that we're sewing. So from here to the pin is right there. Let me see if you can see it better. There, is right there. That from here to here to where the pin is about that far away. Now we've got this much left over. We used 6 strips of binding, and we've got a little bit left over. So what we're going to do is we need an overlay from the pin beyond the pin of 2.5 inches, because that's how wide this is, and we're going to be sewing a seam. So we want 2.5 inches beyond that pin. So I'm going to take a small piece of my binding extra. This was the binding that I just cut off a little piece. When you open it up, remember that this cut was 2.5 inches wide, and that's how much we need the overlay. So instead of measuring 2.5 inches, which you very well could do, you could measure from here 2.5 inches, and then cut the binding. Or you can do it like this, just cut a little piece off, lay it right there at the beginning of your start mark, not where your pin is, but where your binding started. Here's where let me take the pin out. Here's where your binding started. I'm going to lay this piece right where that binding started, and then I'm going to pull this piece back over it and lay it flat. So now if I cut it right here like that, I know, and I'm going to throw this to the side because I don't need that extra piece. I'll use that in a strip quilt. So I've got this piece here where I put that little piece. The overlay here is 2.5 inches. So now this is extra. I don't need that anymore. I'm going to now take, this is why you needed this piece right here that you didn't sew down at the beginning. I'm going to take the right side of this one to the wrong side, to the right side of this one, and I'm going to sew them just like we did when we sewed our binding together. I'm going to lay it like that, right sides together. I'm taking it to the machine, and I'm going to sew diagonal across that strip, just like when we attached our binding strips together. Then when I pull it out, I'm going to cut that excess above that sewing line again, and I'm going to throw that away. or use it in a crumb quilt. And then now my piece lays flat and it's the exact measurement that I need. So I'm going to take it back to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew from where I stopped to where I started. Get to where I started, lock those seams in a little bit, cut that thread, and the back binding is on. We just need to flip it to the front. Now to sew the front binding on, we're going to take that back binding and we're going to roll it to the front and we're going to sew it. Now we don't want to pull it, because if you pull it, then when you look on the back, you're not going to really have any binding because you've pulled it. So we're just going to gently lay it over, cover that seam that we sewed this line on the front. You want to make sure you cover that. Take it to the sewing machine and sew it on. We're going to do this all the way around the front, and I'll show you what we do when we get to the corner. Once I get to the corner, I'm going to stop just a little bit before that corner. Okay, I'm going to show it to you from another angle. We've sewn almost to the end of this row. We've got this over here, the binding laid out. We're flipping it over. Then we're going to sew till we cross both layers of the binding at that seam. We're going to keep our needle down, pull this up, pull the foot up, turn the quilt, lay the foot back down, and then start sewing again until we meet to where we started at that point. So we don't have far to sew. We're going to sew till we get to the end. And then we'll be done with the binding. Clip any loose strings. Now we're back to where we started. So we're going to sew until we get to that point where the first stitches started, and we're going to go over them just a little bit, lock them in place, and then we're done. Clip our threads, cut our strings, and we're done. And now here we are with the finished project. You can see our binding. You can also see our binding on the back. So it looks good. And here is the finished product. Our quilt is complete. So it's that easy. You can do it. I hope you try. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm here to help you any way I can. And until next time, happy quilting.